Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. There is breaking news in war fighting. Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio are here, Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal. Since last we spoke, there have been major developments in several directions. We'll come to the massacre in Lahore, the massacre in Brussels, but we begin with news from the Syrian civil war. Tom, a very good evening to you. The Syrian army is claiming that it has taken Palmyra from the Islamic State. If confirmed, if accurate, this is a significant blow to the Islamic State, to its claims of a new caliphate, to the recruiting, to the resupply, and we could also mention to the Turks who have been supplying the Islamic State. What do we know about this success by the Syrian army and the Russian participation? Good evening to you, Tom.
Well, good evening, John. Well, independent reports seem to confirm the Syrian Arab Army's claims to have retaken Palmyra, and that is significant because this was obviously the ancient city that fell to the Islamic State last year. And you'll recall, John, that the ISIS, the Islamic State, filmed several different gruesome execution videos in the ancient ruins of the city. In fact, at one point, they executed more than 24 Syrian soldiers in front of an ancient amphitheater. So this is, this was someplace that they saw was sort of a site to broadcast their propaganda from. ISIS certainly portrayed it as a symbolic victory. There's also oil facilities in the area. It's also at a crossroads of certain highways and roadways and routes that are used by ISIS for fighting purposes. So I think it's a significant blow to ISIS's caliphate claim, if indeed they have lost Palmyra, and so far it looks like they have.
The Russians, I was told about 2 weeks ago that the Russian air was going to participate in this offensive launched by the Hezbollah, mercenaries, the Syrian army, which is largely mercenary, the Iraqi army as well was participating. There were lots of counterclaims. I do know that the Russians were boasting about how they were withdrawing, mission accomplished, or something like that. Were putting in very good rotary-winged aircraft. The Mi-28 is my memory, the Ka-52, these are air-to-ground strike helicopters with much capability. Do we have any indication that the Russians have been active in this offensive?
Absolutely. The Russian air support has basically been, I think, decisive in Palmyra and in other areas where Syrian forces, ground forces mixed with Hezbollah and Shiite paramilitary militias and other Iranian forces are doing a lot of the groundwork in the ground fight against ISIS and other groups in Syria. The Russian air support has absolutely bolstered those forces on the ground and has basically turned the tide of the war since where it was earlier last year. Recall last year, really this coalition called Jaish al-Fath, which is the Army of Conquest, was really marched its way through Idlib and was marching down basically from Idlib to the coastal province of Latakia and other areas, and basically was doing a lot of damage to the Assad regime. The Russians basically came into Syria wanting to preserve the Assad regime, stop that advance, and then start trying to reclaim certain hotspots or territory, and one of the places they've done that now is Palmyra.
The Palmyra capture, if confirmed, if they hold on to it, is this part of a larger story of marching on Raqqa? Do we know any indication of where they're going?
I think Raqqa will be tough for them to retake because it's just going to require such a commitment of ground forces. But I think the bottom line here is that there's this myth out there that Assad and Russia and the Iranian-backed forces don't fight ISIS. And that's just simply not true. ISIS has claimed every month they release these statistics saying who they are attacking with their martyrs. Their martyrdom operations are suicide bombings. And the second most heavily targeted forces on these statistics are the Syrian regime forces. They go after the Syrian regime quite a bit. And the Syrian regime is countering that, going after them in several different fronts. They fight in eastern Syria, in Deir ez-Zor. They fought on multiple battlefields in the Aleppo province, and they fight in the Homs province, as we see here with Palmyra and other locations. So the idea that they aren't fighting each other just is not true.
We can expect to hear more from Moscow in the next 24 hours about this claim of the Assad regime retaking Palmyra. I mentioned also there were spectacular and upsetting videos of the cutthroats blowing up ancient global ruins that are part of civilization when they took Palmyra. So right now, the Syrian army is claiming a victory. We'll see. These moments are exciting, but the Islamic State has a way of counterattacking. A go now to a massacre, an Easter attack. Bill Roggio joins. Bill, do we have confirmation that this target was Christians, as the Pakistani Taliban says, or is that a boast? Or is that aspirational? Good evening to you, Bill.
Good evening, John. Yes, there indications are that there were Christians at this park, that they were out celebrating Easter. It was women, and largely women and children, who were killed in the attack. The Jamaat al-Ahrar, which is a faction of the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan, has attacked Christians in the past. A year ago, they attacked 2 Christian churches, also in Lahore. So the MO fits, and there were indications from press reporting in Pakistan that there were indeed Christians present, a large number of them present at the bombing.
I see the Pakistani military has immediately sent out the usual press release that it's going to counter. To do what? And what is new here?
Yeah, there's nothing new here. I mean, it's a reactionary move. It's a CYA move by the Pakistani military. They all of a sudden get the idea that the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan is in Lahore and Punjab province, when this group attacked the border crossing with India and killed 50 people in a suicide attack. This is all within the last 2 years. They assassinated the home minister for Punjab province and 16 others in a suicide attack at his home, at his house. So this group, the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan has been present in Punjab and conducting high-profile attacks. And the Pakistani military, what they do is they react to these attacks because it kills women, it kills children. It's like the bombing at the schools in Peshawar. There were 2 of them in the last 2 years. Not bombings, I'm sorry. They were like suicide assaults. They were assault teams that went in and killed children. And then the Pakistani military says it's going to get tough, but it's really just happy talk from the military.
And to your understanding, is this a parochial fight in that this is about Pakistan, or does this have transnational significance, Bill?
I think it has transnational significance. I mean, one of the things I noticed that's interesting, just one day before the attack, the Afghan Taliban released a statement saying that only Islamic holidays can be celebrated in Islamic countries, and then the next day you see an attack targeting Christians in the neighboring country. And the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan recognizes the emir of the Afghan Taliban as their overall leader, the leader of the faithful. So I do think there's significance to this, in the sense that it's just a part of a growing international movement. Look, they all share the same goals, to impose Sharia and establish a global caliphate. It's part of the same network. It's something Tom and I have been preaching to your audience for years.
We go to the massacre in Brussels. Tom, the Islamic State claimed or celebrated or in some way associated itself with the Brussels attack. Do we have confirmation that there was communication, or is this just a bunch of rascals being sinister after a tragedy?
Yeah, no, this was an Islamic State or an ISIS operation for sure. I mean, you look at the individuals involved. One of the key guys is believed to actually have built the suicide vest used in the Paris attacks last November. This is a guy who was trained in Syria, went to Syria in 2013. He's known to answer to Islamic State senior leadership. He's somebody who has been targeted by intelligence services before in the past. I think there's no question in my mind that this is part of the Islamic State's external operations arm. Now, what that is the Islamic State has built this division within their organizational infrastructure that's responsible for plotting mass casualty attacks in the West. I think there are multiple indications at this point that the attack in Brussels was part of that network that they've built in Europe, and they expect to execute more attacks in the future.
And the success, or what is called of success, by the Islamic State in Brussels. Now, I understand we've associated Brussels with a number of attacks over these last years. Really, there was the shooting in a Jewish museum in Brussels a couple of years ago. Is that by accident that it's in Brussels, or is this a particularly rich part of the recruiting out of Europe?
No, unfortunately, Brussels has a thriving jihadi community and has long been a hotbed for recruiting and for indoctrination. That's part of the answer here and part of the reason why we see this. Part of it is that the security services there are not capable of keeping up with the threats, and they don't do a good enough job of clamping down on it. But, you mentioned that attack on the Jewish Museum in Brussels. John, in September 2014, when I testified before Congress, I said, look out, that's a warning sign that you could see organized Islamic State attacks in Europe in the near future. At that point, people were saying, no, they're just interested in building their caliphate. They're not in acquiring territory. They don't really want to attack the West. I said I would not make that assumption, and we're already seeing indications that they're plotting in Europe, and unfortunately that came true.
And the Islamic State, in making these claims, I guess they celebrated the Brussels attack. This is very much their style, to go on afterwards, not to warn beforehand. Is that correct, Tom? That's why it's so difficult to tell whether they're being aspirational or whether they had operational knowledge.
No, John, they didn't just celebrate it. They claim responsibility for it. They said we did this. So the second part of it was they celebrated it in propaganda, but they actually warned Brussels and Belgium beforehand, all the way back in February of last year in their English language Debate magazine. They said, we're coming. We're going to attack you. And some of the guys who carried out the Brussels attacks have known ties, known relationships with the guys who were featured in that Debate magazine. So I don't think there's any doubt that this was an Islamic State operation, that it was something that was planned by them. The professional terrorists, professionally trained terrorists carried it out. They said they were coming for Brussels. They came for Brussels, and the Belgian authorities did nothing to stop them.
Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, Long War Journal. The breaking news is that the Syrian army is claiming that it has retaken Palmyra, the ancient archaeological site and city. The more significant news is that the Islamic State is on the march, and when we come back, there is a claim by the Defense Department that a leader of the Islamic State is dead. We'll talk to Bill Roggio about that claim. I'm John Batchelor.